Hello and good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, Disaster Plan Requirements and Resources for North Carolina's Local Child Welfare Agencies. My name is Jonathan Rockoff, and I'm going to be your facilitator today. We have a great presenter, Ms. Debra McHenry, who's going to be sharing important information about this topic, and we're happy to have everyone joining us, so let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit more about this webinar. It was developed through a federal disaster grant to the North Carolina Division of Social Services by the Family and Children's Resource Program at the UNC Chapel Hill School of Social Work. A recording of this webinar will be available at ncswlearn.org as well as on the FCRP website for those that would like to reference it or share it with colleagues. Some goals for this webinar. We hope by the end that you will know why child welfare agencies need disaster plans, what's expected to be addressed within a child welfare disaster plan, and finally, where to access all NCDSS disaster plan information. So many of you have already found the chat box. You've sent us some greetings and salutations in there and told us where you are. We appreciate that. You'll also see that there are options in the top left of this box, and you can indicate if you'd like to chat with everybody, or you can move your cursor over the plus sign to display hosts and presenters, or you can select an individual you'd like to privately chat with. This is going to be the primary way you can communicate with us. You can use this box to send in questions or comments. We're going to try our best to answer all your questions during this event. And this box sometimes moves fast, but do not worry. We have someone who's going to help us keep track of your questions. And speaking about questions, since this is just one 90-minute webinar and we have about 300 people participating, we know it will not be likely to address every single question, but we are going to do our best. We're going to have a follow-up document that's going to be sent out to everyone who participated. We're going to answer your questions and then send that document out with responses. And again, like I mentioned, we are going to have this webinar is being recorded, and it's going to be available on NCSW Learn and the FCRP website. So if you need to get our attention, if you want to raise your hand, you can certainly do so. To do that, up at the top of your screen, you have a hand icon. Next to that, there's a drop-down arrow. And if you click that, you can raise your hand. You'll see the option there to raise hand. So let's go ahead and test that out. So can everyone practice raising their hand? And again, to do that, you go to the little hand icon at the top of your screen, click the drop-down arrow, and then click raised hand. All right, very good. I see everyone's hands popping up. Wonderful. And just to give you a snapshot of who's registered for this webinar, out of the about 300 registrants, we have 30 direct client contact or line child welfare staff. We have 33 agency directors or agency directors of social work, child welfare, 142 line supervisors, 77 program managers or program administrators, and 3 county DSS trainers and staff development professionals. So again, it's an honor to welcome each of you to today's webinar. Again, my name is Jonathan, and I'm with the UNC Family and Children's Resource Program. Again, I'm going to be your host and moderator. We also have technical help from our colleagues Philip Armfield and John McMahon. So next, let me introduce our presenter, Ms. Debra McHenry, who's the NCDSS Child Fatality Review Administrator, and she's also filling the role as the Disaster Plan Coordinator. So thank you all for assisting with this learning opportunity for our child welfare system. We're going to give you the presenter's contact information at the end of our webinar. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenter today, Ms. Debra McHenry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all. I see your counties when you're saying good morning, and I hope it is sunnier there than it is here. So let's get into the discussion about disasters. Next slide. Can you go to the next one? Okay, so first and foremost, it's just important to say that North Carolina Child Welfare Services are required in Title IV-B, Subpart 1 of the Social Security Act, to have a disaster plan. And the federal statute requires every state to have a disaster plan that addresses how child welfare agencies mitigate risk, plan for, respond to, and recover from disasters. This requirement is so that when a disaster hits, we have a plan that we can go to for how we will do business and ensure the safety and well-being of those we serve in a disaster. This disaster might be at the state level and where there's several counties involved, but it also could be just within your county. Something happens and you have a county disaster declaration. And this plan is important because it's not person dependent. Anyone should be able to walk into the agency, pick up the plan, and do what's in the plan, regardless of whether they've experienced working through a disaster in your county or not. As everyone knows, we've had some major disasters in North Carolina. Matthew hit us really hard, and then we had Florence, and right behind that was Michael in 2018. We've had tornadoes, severe storms, flooding. In 2020, we had declarations for those storms, Hurricane Isaias and Eta. And most recently, we've had Hurricane Fred that impacted several counties in our mountains area. So it's important for all of us across the state to know what it is we're going to do when a disaster hits. So North Carolina is required to submit a state disaster plan along with our 5-year plan to our federal partners, and then provide annual progress reports regarding any lessons learned or challenges we experienced in implementing our plan. As a supervising agency, we must also report out on the impact of the disaster that occurs in North Carolina on child welfare across our state. The people who represent you in Congress and in our state legislature want to know how services in your county have been impacted. So today we're going to go over mandatory areas that we are to have in our plans across the state. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. To assist in the development of North Carolina's disaster planning efforts, in the spring of 2021, the Child Welfare Services section of NCDSS engaged in qualitative information gathering to learn from all of you your recent experiences preparing for and responding to disasters. So at the request of NCDSS, UNC's Family and Children's Resource Program conducted the following. 2 90-minute focus groups of child welfare staff, county child welfare staff, 1 90-minute focus group attended by DSS, state DSS child welfare staff, 7 interviews with key informants, including county directors and representatives from private child placing agencies. And we also did an online survey of resource parents from counties that had been involved in disasters, and they participated in a focus group. Feedback included, but was not limited to, recommendations for NCDSS planning, county child welfare planning, family disaster planning, and specific lessons learned for communication strategies, locating children, and trauma-informed strategies for promoting self-care. And we want to thank everyone for that valuable input. This feedback helped us in the development of a toolkit for child welfare agencies, and it includes resources for your own agency planning. And we're going to look at that a little bit later in the webinar. And I encourage you to talk with one another. We have counties that have lots of experience in disasters. So if you have questions, I know that these directors and county staff would be great resources as well. Okay, Next. So let's talk about what is expected of county child welfare agencies. Typically, counties have a county-wide disaster plan that is held by the County Emergency Management Department. And this plan includes all county departments, including social services. You may already have a county child welfare plan as a part of this larger agency emergency preparedness plan. And if so, I encourage you to get it out, have it there, and as we go through this, you can check your plan against the things that we addressed today and ensure it complies with all of the requirements that are specified in federal law. Please make note of anything that comes to you as we go through this, whether you have a plan or you don't, that you can use in your work on your plan. We want this to be a time that helps you kind of think about areas that maybe need a little beefing up in your plan. The required federally components of all child welfare disaster plans are as follows. Identify, locate, and continue services for children. Respond to new child welfare cases. Remain in communication with caseworkers and other essential personnel. Preserve essential program records and coordinate services and share information with other states. And we're going to go into each of these a little bit more as we go through the presentation. Next, if we're going to pull up a template that NCDSS has done in order to help you with all of the federal aspects of our plan. So we're going to look at this, pull it up, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about it. So along with your actual copy of your child welfare specific plan, you will complete this 2-page summary checklist of your disaster plan and put that on the top and send it in to NCDSS. And so what this does is help assure that all of the child welfare requirements are included in your plan. NCDSS is providing county child welfares with this template as a checklist to aid you in assuring all required components are in your county plan. It also includes the point of contacts for the development and updates to the plan, types of disasters that you're addressing within the plan, and when was it distributed to your staff and partners. As we mentioned, there's assurances there that you have as a part of your plan all of the required components. And when we go over the toolkit, we will highlight a few trauma-informed strategies that are also included in the toolkit to support your work with supporting staff. As a county, as a state, our counties range from small to large, and thus how your plans look will be somewhat different. But it's important that however you choose to write your plan, that all of these required elements are in your plan that we've just mentioned. Identify, locate, continue services for children, respond to new child welfare cases, remain in communication with caseworkers and other essential personnel, preserve essential program records, and coordinate services and share information with other states. So I think right now we're going to do a poll. And just out of curiosity, we'd just like you to respond to a couple of these questions. Okay, well, it looks like 45% of everybody here is saying yes, they do have a disaster child welfare specific plan, so that's great. And 42% say they aren't sure, so they probably, that would be a good question to go back and ask and take a few notes about things that come to your mind here today. So let's take a quick look at what it looks like as we're in the hope at this template so that we can aid ensuring that the disaster plan meets all of the components. So you'll see here the point persons in the first one, the type of disasters considered in your county planning. And then the next question is, has it been distributed and discussed with your staff, resource families, and local agency partners? And can we scroll down just a little? So then, who is it that agency staff has updated disaster plans for themselves and their families? So you kind of know what their plan is should they have to evacuate. That's kind of what that's getting at. The next one is our county disaster plan meets the following, and you just check which of those do you have that in there. So what you'll do is use this A, B, and C. This is your checklist as you go through it, and make sure your plan addresses all of those points. And then you can just put this on the top of your plan to submit it to the state. Okay, next slide. So the very first component of that is identify, locate, and continue services. And when you have looking at writing your plan, things that you should think about and include in your plan would be, how will you continue to provide services in your county in the event you're not able to return to your offices right away? How will you locate all of the families that you're already working with in assessment, in-home, and in permanency planning, including children in congregate care services? How will you assess the needs of the children and family you work with immediately after a disaster and ensure that their ongoing needs are met? And then how will you connect families to those services offered through FEMA, such as mental health counseling, emergency food assistance, housing? Some may need emergency housing and other concrete supports. So this is particularly important when serving the vulnerable populations that often come to our attention. And many of them may need help navigating what supports are available and how you apply for them. In addition to that, we have children who already have some trauma. And so we need to be mindful that these children who are already suffered trauma and loss may be triggered by or experiencing additional trauma or loss brought on by a disaster. And in that case, they will need support for this secondary trauma. Next slide. The next required component is respond to new child welfare cases. And in this area, some things that you should be thinking about and having in your plan are how you take new CPS reports when the power's out in your office and it's not usable. How will you respond to immediate response reports and be prepared to address reports that come from shelter staff or emergency responders as a result of the disaster itself? And be prepared to address the needs of unaccompanied minors who may have been separated from their families due to the disaster. Next slide. The requirement for your child welfare plan to remain in communication with caseworkers and other essential personnel should include how you'll know if a disaster has impacted your staff. And in turn, due to that impact, will you have personnel to cover the provision of all the services that you need? How will you remain in contact with resource families and congregate care providers? How will you handle any media requests that come in? How will you maintain contact with the state office so that we can receive your reports on any data regarding the impact to your county and your ability to provide those services? You should anticipate that you will have staff and services that are impacted. So it's helpful to establish backup plans for communication use during and after a disaster. For example, is there a local coordinator that can help identify multiple ways to provide and receive information with staff, with providers, and with families? Next slide. The next mandated area is preserve essential program records. And things in this area that you should include would be, if you have paper records, how will you preserve and protect those paper records? Another area in this that you may want to consider are hacks. So if you have electronically backed up records, if you can't, have electric, if the server's down, if you've been hacked, how will you back up? And how will you ensure that you have preserved those records as well as have access to the records that you, due to power issues and that kind of thing? Have a plan for documenting and preserving agency activities completed during this disaster response. Again, if you have an electronic case management system and you can't get into it, what will be your backup plan for ensuring you don't lose any documentation during this time? And as always, consider client confidentiality when reporting where to store and back up any information. All children served through ICPC must be accounted for, assessed the needs, and then communicated their safety status and any needs to the agency that holds custody. So first we're going to talk about if the child is living in North Carolina and you're providing supervisory function for the agency with custody. So the expectation for your child welfare plan to coordinate services and share information with other states that reside in North Carolina but under the placement authority of another state means that when a disaster is occurring, you must locate each child and provide an update on the safety and the well-being of that child to the NC ICPC office within 48 hours. In a few minutes, we'll review the spreadsheet that will help you report this. You will list the name of the children currently displaced, where they're located, and when they return. So your plan should include how you're going to maintain that contact with families served through ICPC and designate a point of contact that can complete data requests and provide updates to the state ICPC office. Okay. Next slide. If your agency has children placed in another state and that state has a disaster, then the NCICPC office will obtain a list of children that are via NCFAS that are placed in that state and will share the names of these children along with any applicable resources to the receiving state's ICPC office. The receiving state ICPC office will communicate with us about what the status of those children are in that state in the same way that we're going to report for children that are in our state during a disaster. All right, let's look at the data reporting. So within 24 hours of the disaster onset, regional child welfare consultants are going to request a status report of the identified children in DSS custody or in a placement in their county that were impacted by the disaster. So if we could open up that spreadsheet. So you will notice that there's tabs at the bottom, and the very first one is Disaster Overview. So this contains information about the overall impact to your county. And the next tab says Evacuation. And this tab is going to tell us the number of families you are providing service to that were evacuated. Then you see a tab for foster children. So this is the tab that you will report the status of any of the children that are in your care and custody. And then you'll also see a tab for ICPC children. So you'll do the same thing in this tab for ICPC children. So there's instructions within the tab for each of these reporting areas. You will probably, my guess is you'll report on some, and then it may build and then decrease as you go through the disaster, because you're going to be saying, oh, they've returned, everything's stable, everything's fine, as we move out of the recovery part of the disaster. So this will be the form that is there for you to report your data into us about what's happening in your county, so that we are able to report out to interested stakeholders what is happening across our state. All right, the next slide. So what about the state office, and what can you expect from us? NCDSS has many state responsibilities during a disaster, but one of the most important is to make sure that you have what you need to meet the need of children and families in your county. So we are here to support you in a disaster. So the information that you're sending to us helps give us an idea of what the impact is to your work and what areas we might need to be thinking about and checking in with you on to see what we could do to support you. We will do this by working with you to determine what resources needed to meet our statutory requirements. So I know a lot of counties have been really good about buddying with one another in a disaster and trying to help support the work that needs to happen. And in a disaster like Michael and Florence, it impacted such a huge part of our state. One of the things the state office can do is try to look and see how we can help support you when those local, everybody around you has also been impacted. So your regional program representative will receive your reports, and they will facilitate communication between the state office and your agency. Okay. So when are county plans due, and where can you find all this information? So county child welfare agencies are going to be required to submit a copy of their disaster plan that's child welfare specific, and this 2-page summary checklist we've pulled up and looked at, to your regional child welfare consultant every year by April 1. And on the screen, you will see a snapshot of where you can find the child welfare disaster plan information. There's a county template there, there's the toolbox, and the reporting form are all where you see in our manual under disaster preparedness resources. Okay, let's take a minute and look at the toolkit. This resource can help inform and support your agency planning efforts and is also located in the disaster preparation and response area on that website we just looked at where the manual is. And it's called a Toolkit for North Carolina Child Welfare Agencies. And this toolkit provides resources to support coordinated disaster preparedness, response, and recovery effort throughout the state. The toolkit uses trauma-informed approach to all stages of disaster management and is organized into 3 broad areas: planning and preparing for disasters, responding to disasters, and recovering from disasters.
All right, and we just want to point your attention to underneath our pictures, you see a file share pod. and there's a file called Disasters Guide to Toolkit. We would ask you to download that document there. To do that, like I said, you just hover over it, and then you should see the option to download. And this is a quick reference guide of the toolkit that's going to help you know where to find information regarding the 5 main federal requirements for your child welfare disaster plan. So again, it's just a guide to help you kind of navigate that larger document. This is just a small one-pager to let you know where you can find more information about the 5 main federal requirements. And again, that document is right underneath my picture and Debra's picture. Just hover your mouse over it, and just click download file, and it should pop right up. Debra, I'll kick it back to you.
Okay, so let's look at the first one, planning and preparing for disasters. With planning and preparing for a disaster section of the toolkit, you will find strategies to address the federal requirements that we've talked about today. And there are suggested action steps that you can take in the toolbox, such as identifying disaster teams, team leads, assign individual duties, plan to conduct in-service trainings for all your staff on the major components of the disaster plan, and then drill and test the plan to see if you've thought of everything. And it seems like you have everything covered in your plan. Of course, when we go through a disaster, we always learn new things, and that's when we go back and update the plan. Check agency storage to ensure you have an adequate supply of emergency items, and conduct meetings with agency partners and local organizations to ensure coordination of disaster-related activities, and set up crisis communication plans. So all of this is part of the toolbox. Okay, let's now look at responding to disasters in the toolbox. With this section of the toolkit, it includes examples of challenges agencies may face in disaster response and ways to avoid or address those challenges. Examples include, but they're not limited to, ideas for when typical communication methods may be inoperable, how to ensure staff is clear about work responsibilities during and immediately after the disaster, strategies for locating children that are unaccounted for, having a trauma-informed response to staff and families that will support their physical and emotional safety. Okay, we'll move to recovering from disasters. And this section of the toolkit, since recovery can last for months, this section can help the agencies focus on a shift to responding to a broad array of needs. And it works best when approached in partnership with other community organizations and providers. Agencies may experience caseload fluctuations due to relocated families, displaced families, staff being personally affected by the disaster. And so this section talks about what's best practice for leaders checking in with staff, how to listen and ask what staff need and to meet those needs. Be proactive in addressing staff members' mental health needs. Offer staff treatment for trauma and encourage them to participate in treatment. Encourage staff, acknowledge and celebrate successes, and promote activities to support physical, emotional, and social wellness. It's a parallel process. When staff feel supported, they in turn more easily can support families' needs. And there's a lot of resources for staff and families as well in the toolkit. So I encourage you to look through it. One last area. Next slide. Next. There's one last area that I want to mention today. And go to the next slide. This is a course for resource parents. So in partnership with North Carolina DSS, in partnership with the North Carolina Child Welfare Family Advisory Council, UNC's Family and Children's Resource Program is developing a 1-hour course for resource parents called Preparing for and Responding to Disasters. And this course will address expectations and best practices related to disasters, including what resource parents should do before, during, and after a disaster. It includes trauma-informed resources and a template for resource parents to be able to develop their own family disaster plan. County child welfare agencies and resource parents are expected to have a current plan for how they will maintain contact during a disaster so that we know where the children are and that they are safe. This course will be available on fosteringnorthcarolina.org in November 2021. It's strongly encouraged that all resource parents complete this course. If you or your resource parents are not subscribed to this learning site for our state's foster, adoptive, and kin providers, then click on this link and sign up for news of when this new free course will be available, as well as other courses. On the homepage of fosteringnorthcarolina.org, there is a flyer you can share with resource parents to get them encouraged to sign up. And here are some additional resources. The U.S. Children's Bureau supports the Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative, and they have developed a resource roadmap to coping with disasters and strengthening systems, and a guide called Coping with Disasters and Strengthening Systems. The resource roadmap contains a list of supportive publications, and the guide contains examples of strategies from jurisdictions across the country. Click on the Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative website to access the resources, and the link you will see in the slide. So we hope now you know why child welfare agencies need disaster plans, what's expected to be addressed within the county disaster plan, child welfare disaster plan, and where to access all of NCDSS disaster plan information. The plan and the toolkit are available in the policy manual on the NCDHHS website. The resource parent course will be available on fosteringnorthcarolina.org in November 2021. So don't forget to subscribe and encourage resource parents to subscribe so that they will know as soon as this course is available. The follow-up document that answers questions there will be a follow-up document that answers questions asked during this webinar that we may not get to, and it will be emailed out to all registered participants and posted with the webinar recording. And the webinar recording, again, will be on ncslearn.org and on the Family and Children's Resource Program page. And you can always contact your regional child welfare consultant if you have additional questions at a later date.
All right, thank you so much, Deborah. At this point, we want to take the time to answer any questions you have. So you have that chat option available. So please go ahead, and if you have any questions, drop those in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. I see a few people typing, so we'll wait a second and let those answers or those questions come in, and then give Deborah a moment to answer some of those.
Yes, I see the question about the template for the resource families. There is a template also included in the state plan. The North Carolina state plan, there's a template to use. Hal, I see your question about copies of other counties' disaster plans they can share. So we will definitely, I will work with Jennifer Oshnock, and we will, once we get those plans in, we will think about a way to share some of that. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint, yes.
Yes, thank you, Shatara. When the course is posted online, we're going to include a copy of this PowerPoint along with the presentation when it's posted online. Okay, we see more people typing. So again, just go ahead and drop your questions in the chat pod, and as those come in, Debra will try to answer those for you.
For your business continuity plans, I would follow your county. They will probably have more information in those than what we're asking you to put in your child welfare specific plan, and you certainly can refer to that plan in your plan. Yes, Carlotta's Dixon's on the line, and she's reminding about being aware of their agency BCP COOP plan. And this definitely, you will have a much more detailed plan for the areas we outline in your business plan. And as I say, you're definitely that you would just be lifting some pieces out of that to put in here so that we just have a general idea of what your plan is for protecting and backing up and accessing records. We won't need all the details that you have in that agency plan. Your Kelly, I see your question about, I think you're asking, how does this fit with your county emergency management plan? And so I would look to your county DSS to say how they want to integrate those. But these are requirements for child welfare, and all of the case-specific information will come back up through your children's program representative because there's confidential information in there. But within your agency, you should make a decision about what you're submitting as part of your whole agency plan. And I'll leave that to each county leadership. It is okay to tie it to your BCP COOP. That would be perfectly fine. So how you handle what you do with your plan in your county, I will leave that to county leaders to decide, as long as we know that we have a child welfare specific plan and that it covers the mandated areas. That's going to be our area of interest. Sharon, I see your question about the list of facilities that can assist with providing placements and services. I think, and we'll do some follow-up on that one because this isn't my area of expertise. It would be under Linda Waite. But I do believe that what we do is in a disaster, when we see what the need is, we begin looking to see what places we can find to help out. So it's really something we're pulling together at the time of the disaster, but that would be one of the functions the state provides in trying to support the county with their need. So if the county is really struggling and needing some placement for children due to a disaster, then that would be something that we definitely could help with. What prompts the implementation of a plan? That's a good question. I think, as I said, there could be something happening just in your county that might not, the state might not be activated and going to respond. It's a local emergency. At the state level, what we're looking at, as soon as we hear that the Emergency Operations Center is going to activate, then that would be when we get out our plan and start operationalizing it at the state level. So I would offer that as a suggestion for anything at the county level. If your county is EOC is getting ready to activate, then that would be a cue to get your disaster plan out, review it, and be prepared.
All right, I don't see any other questions at the moment. I'll give you all another minute if you can think of any. So I'll put myself on mute and wait about another minute, see if any questions start coming in. Okay, see a few people typing, so let them type in their questions.
Yes, Carlotta's raising the point that should staff also coordinate with their agency disaster emergency coordinator? And I do think that it's going to be a local agency decision how you want to incorporate your child welfare plan into your plan, whether it's the BCP COOP, as someone mentioned, as an addendum, or whether it's in your larger DSS plan. How you want to do that for your agency is an agency decision. But they should be made aware. You should be having talking so that they're aware of the things that you have to do. On one of the slides, we talked about, collaborating with other people. So who are the people within a disaster? Well, definitely be your larger DSS plan because you're also supporting shelters. So yes, you definitely need to be having a conversation and everybody being on the same page about resources. Is there something new? Oh, is this, so Angela, this is the first time we're introducing our state plan. We've really done a lot of work, I hope you can tell, trying to beef up what we're doing with disasters. So that's why we're having the webinar today, because this is a first that we've really developed all these resources and put them out there and really decided we needed to talk about what all was required in a disaster. So that's why we're doing the presentation today. Yes, Stephanie's saying definitely loop in whoever does the business continuity plan. And I agree with that wholeheartedly because as you saw in here, one of the most important pieces that we're mandated to address are what are we going to do in a disaster? So if you don't have power, none of your electronics work, what are you going to do to perform your mandated functions? And how are you going to do all of that? How are you going to keep the data so that when you can get back in that you can make sure that the data is all there? You can, hacks, storms, floods, there could be mass explosion downtown. I mean, there's all kinds of scenarios that can happen that you might need to implement your disaster plan. So you definitely need to be in conversation with the person who's over the BCP COOP and making sure that all your child welfare record issues have been addressed and there's a backup plan in the BCP COOP, as well as you knowing and being able to write a high-level summary for us of how you're going to do those things in this plan. So you can take part of that out of that BCP COOP.
All right. Thank you, Deborah. I don't see any more questions coming in, but if you do have any between now and the rest of our time together here this morning, please drop them in the chat. And at the end, we're also going to give you Deborah's contact information if some come to you. So one thing that we would like to ask all of you, though, is what's one thing that you heard today from Debra that you can do, that you can start doing today or tomorrow in response to what you've learned today? So go ahead and drop that in the chat. What's one thing after this presentation and getting all that great information from Debra you know that you can do today or tomorrow to help move this mandate and initiative forward? All right, I'll start capturing some of these as they come in just to highlight some of them. So Brandy Mann said, start working on our local plan to cover all aspects, learn from the training. I'm seeing some people saying begin working on the plan. Karen said, ensure that I have what I need to take CPS reports by paper if needed. Begin the unit discussion plan. Renee said she's going to access the toolkit, start talking with staff. Tina said, locate the child welfare disaster plan. Good. I'm seeing some great answers pop in there. Sounds like there's a lot of things we can start working on right away. And Debra, as you're reading these, if you have any questions or any follow-up comments, please feel free to hop in.
I see a lot of great here for getting started.
I see a lot of great plans here for getting started and moving forward. And remember, the plan will be due into your regional rep by April 1st of next year.
Okay, and I saw somebody said promote the upcoming training on fostering NC that's coming out. Absolutely. That should be ready to go in November. Use the toolkit. Wonderful. So it sounds like we all have some action steps we can take after our time here together. We'd love to see that. So we said we'd give you Debra's contact information. Here it is. So a reminder, it's Debra McHenry, the Child Fatality Review Administrator with the Division of Social Services. And her email address is debra.mchhenry@dhhs.nc.gov. So if any questions pop into your mind later that you want clarification on or need follow-up on, right there is her email address. So please feel free to reach out to her.